is the other slide that you need to wake up for. If you're going to see, this is the second slide. There's two more. It only dries on the outer 3/4 of an inch. Okay? The rest of it sits there. When the outer 3/4 is dry, the inner part then starts to dry. In here, it's just as wet as when you first mowed it. It's direct cut stuff. On the outside, it's dry as baled hay. That's sort of like saying, well, I'm at average temperature. I got my head in the oven and my feet in the freezer. I'm at average temperature. Well, it's the same way here. We got dry baled hay and we have direct cut and we mix it together and we call it good feed. You run it into the bags, silage, and you get pockets of mold all the way through it. Comprised, also mixed in with pockets of butyric. The dry, moldy, white moldy stuff is the outside of the windrow. The butyric plots are the center of the windrow. In bunk silos, when they pack it, they get these like plates. You pull the plates off, break them open, and you can smell the butyric in it. Because that's the center of the windrow, which is direct cut slop put into the silo. What they found is when they went to wide swath same-day haylage, the quality of the feed and the consistency of the feed changed dramatically in the bunks and the bags. It became very uniform. There wasn't these pockets of over-dry and under-dry. In that center, you got it packed, you got high humidity, it's in the shade, the stomata are closed, nothing is drying, respiration is going on. So looking at this as it comes out the back of your machine, now remember, it only dries on the outer 3/4 of an inch. So if we have a 12-foot mower and we put it into a 3.5-foot swath, which is very typical of those machines, 80%, almost 79% of the material is not drying, it's composting. 20% is drying to make milk cow feed. If we simply spread it out and put it into a wider swath, you're looking at 70% of it drying to make milk cow feed. A huge change in the drying rate, a huge change in the amount of photosynthesis that is going on in your field, adding sugars, adding starches. Now, when we first started doing this, the guys went out, they took their mowers and they opened them up all the way. And then they called me up and said, Tom, it didn't work. I opened my mower up all the way and it wasn't dried the same day that I mowed it. Well, when they opened their mower up all the way, 12-foot mower only went to 8 foot because that's how wide the rolls are. That's 66% of cutter bar width. That is not wide swath. If Fay was going to sell you his pickup truck and it's a V8 engine and it's only running on 6 cylinders, it's not a V8 engine. It's something a whole lot less than that. And 66% of cutter bar width is not a V8. All right? It's only 66%. Dr. Cherney did a similar study at Cornell. He did a similar study to what I did, and we both came to the same conclusion. You need to be at 80 to 85% of cutter bar width if you want wide swath to work for you. It needs to get out there, which has thrown a huge hand grenade in the machinery business. Now, some of the machinery companies jumped on this, changed their machines around so they laid them out real wide. Other ones still have their head in the sand and refuse to even acknowledge it while they continue to sell machines to farmers that have no chance of getting dry simply because their back part of the machine is too narrow for wide swath. You have to take the width of the mower, and then what is the swath coming out the back? Is it 85% or is it 40%? Now, for you guys and gals that are making dry hay also, there are some machines out there, and when I talk about machines, I'm just talking about machines. I own no stock in any machine, and no machine company pays me a cent. I'm just telling you what we've seen. But I know New Holland, I know Pottinger, and I know Vermeer have made machines, and I think Gale may also make machines that have almost full-width rollers on it. So if you're doing a lot of dry hay and you need to use the rollers to dry it down, you can get some with the real wide on it. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, the question is he has a 9-foot mower. He tries to lay it out wide, but in doing so, he's going to be driving on the hay. Should he be moving his tractor tires out? What should he do? You are right in line with my next statement, which is I always assure there's always a few older farmers, and there's none here I can see, but the older guys my age who will assure me afterwards that I am going to hell because I drive on the hay. I drive on the hay. And you know what the dirty secret is? When you drive on the hay, it's only 3/4 of an inch thick, and it dries just as well.
You drive faster?
Yes, yes. I didn't want to say that because they wouldn't believe me. The gentleman's saying that his dries faster where he drives on it, and that's really what we have found also. And the other thing is you get the cutter bar up out of the dirt, so you leave a little stubble there, especially with an alfalfa grass mix. That's absolutely vital. Get the cutter bar up. When you go over it with the tractor tires, unless you're pushing it into mud, it's going to spring up, and your rakes and mergers are going to be able to pick it up without picking up the dirt, and it'll get 98% of the material. Yeah, the gentleman says he ran over with a cultipator and it dried faster. That's because you now have a thin layer that's only 3/4 of an inch thick. I haven't gone there yet. I have credibility issues with some of this to start with, even though it's working and we've proved it. Okay, when we were out doing this, we took a New Holland mower, and that's the company, they were good enough to loan us a mower, and we mowed it at 40%, 60%, or 59%, 73%, 83% of cutter bar width, and we mowed at 94% of cutter bar width. 2 hours after mowing, the 83 and the 90 are almost ready to ensile in 2 hours on heavy first cutting material. What worked the best? Gentleman over here said it earlier. A 6-foot sidebar sickle mower worked the best. It's the gold standard. It cuts it off. It leaves it at 90% of cutter bar width. It doesn't damage the stems at all. Now, am I recommending you go get rid of your disc mower and get a sidebar sickle? No. I'm just telling you, it's the principle. It is that it's wide. I've done this talk for probably 4,000 or 5,000 Amish and Mennonites. They love it because that's what they've got in their barns most of the time. And they are using this whole system very well. But the point being, 90% of cutter bar width with no conditioning dries the best. The wider it is, the better it's going to dry. That is the key take-home message. And if you look at this machine here, they put this little shield on because I'm going to drive on the hay. I can't drive on the hay. Well, when we took that little shield that was here and we took it off, that was the increase in drying rate. You got rid of that little windrow that you're putting in on either side. And the better the quality of the feed, the more important it is to get rid of that windrow. All right, in this farm, the guy went out and he mowed some wide and he mowed some traditional. He mowed it around 11 o'clock in the morning. We went out and looked at it around 2:30 in the afternoon. He walked over to the right side of the picture, looked at the narrow throws, and he said, I think this is going to be ready by 10 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to be able to chop it. He walked over to the left side of the picture, looked at the wide swath, picked up his phone, called back to the barn, said, get the merger going, get the chopper going, get the trucks going. This is ready now. And this is very typical. The biggest problem we have when people transition to this system is they get it too dry. It doesn't look like cornflakes out there. It isn't ready, when in fact it is ready. Now mowers, this is one of the mowers, and again, I own no stock in mowers. I like this mower because a couple of things. First of all, it lays it out at 80% of cutter bar width. The only drum is in close to the cutter bar cutting unit itself. The drums are flat, and you're going to see why in a minute. That is important. Cone-shaped drums make little whirlpools. Flat drums do not. The knives are flat. Tapered knives are like propellers. They suck things up. They suck up dirt. They suck up all the garbage, and yes, they get the down material. If you ever looked at the down material in your field, if you had to go that long that it was down for a bit, It's not something you want to feed your cows in the first place. Leave it there. You don't need to suck up all the dirt and the down material. On the left, that was mowed, wide swath, no conditioning, 90% of cutter bar width. On the right, that mower is leaving 4 windrows. That's not the same as wide swath. Because he had tapered knives that were making an airplane propeller-like effect, lifting stuff off the ground, and they had cone tops, which accentuated that whirlpool effect, he was making 4 windrows. And I've had farmers complain that these mowers, not this company, but just mowers that do this, make these little narrow windrows, do not dry as well as the ones that make flat windrows. Now, there are things you can do. If you have one of them, they make 4 windrows, you can put a little diverter in the back of each one, and I'll show you another picture in a minute to spread that out. If your mower only goes 60% of cutter bar width, you can put diversion fins on the back and spread it out. I think these cost, I don't know, $250, $300 is the last time I priced them. They're probably about $800 now. Or you can go like Bruce did, 1-inch square tube stock. He played around with it a little bit. He had to do some putzing. That's where the art of farming, you guys and gals are all better at the art of farming than I am, because that's where you use your common sense and creativity to make things work. The principle is, I need to get it out the full width. He put these little bars on here. You notice the 2 in the middle are gone? He said, I had bare ground in the middle. They worked so well. For just a few bucks of tube stock, he was able to get that to shoot it all the way out behind the tires and spread it out to full width. So this is a cheap change that you can make, or a relatively inexpensive change. With a little afternoon of work, you can change your machine. If it's close to, but not quite there, you can get it to spread out. Now, if you have one that has the drums on either end, the center of the machine is fine. That material is going in the front and out the back. So the side material is what's being gathered into a windrow. And that's where you need the spreaders, is just on the outer portion of the machine in almost like a V pattern, so that it spreads it back out again where the mower brought it back together. You use your creativity and you can do it, so you can use the equipment that you have. Yes?
That's got the crimping rollers on it. Can you spread them enough so that you're not...
The question is, this has crimping rollers on it. Can you spread them enough so it doesn't damage the stem? The answer is no. I tried that with that brand new New Holland. That was our great idea. We were going to mow without any conditioning. So I opened them up. They were like 1.5 inches gap in there. As the forage fed up into it and hit those rollers, it kinked it just a little. But when you picked up the stem, there'd be 2 or 3 kinks in it, and that's enough to break the capillary flow. So if you're doing it that way, it's not true non-condition. It is already damaged some by going through the rollers. I would leave the rollers on. The most important factor is the width coming out the back of the machine. Stay with the equipment you've got, but get it out to full width. That is the most important part. Yes? Tethering, you have to wait for 2 more slides. So you have to stay awake for another 2 minutes, and I'll answer that question. Good question. Yes? All right, the gentleman was saying that he was combining oats and they weren't dry, so he wanted to make a swather out of his mower, which is being creative. So we opened up the back of the rollers and put blocks in, so we had enough space for it to go through without threshing the grain off it, but still make a swath that he can get his oats dry. When we did our study, we put blocks in, and it still kinked it. It wouldn't knock the oats off, which is, it achieved the objective you were going for, but it still kinked the stems. And I was very disappointed it did. Yes? Question is on time conditioners. You have to wait another, I think, 4 slides for that, and you're probably not going to like my answer. Okay, the back of the machine, you need to open it up so it comes out. This is winter forage, winter triticale. If you don't have it coming out the back of the machine, if you put that deflector bar down so it makes a wide swath, which is an engineering answer. I mean, the reason we're dealing with all this is because engineers had an answer for raking. You don't have to rake. We'll make shields on the back. We have an engineering answer. They never asked the cow what she thought of the stuff. The same thing with these deflector shields. Oh, we just put a deflector shield down and it'll fall straight down on the ground. Well, this is what we found when we were drying clover, and we found the same thing when we were drying this highly digestible, low lignin winter forage triticale. It comes back, it hits that deflector shield. It's like taking wet spaghetti and throwing it against the kitchen cabinet, and it falls in a lump on the counter. That's exactly what it was doing out the back of the machine. Even set at a partial angle, it still made lumps. And it came out the back of the machine. It's sort of like the cow walking out the barn, and you have a nice, lengthy, white line walk, and she walks out and goes plop, plop, plop right down the middle of it. They always did it when I was working on the farm. The same thing is coming out the back of your machine. This is a study that we were doing up in Delaware County, same day haylage from red clover, heavy first cutting wet clover. It had rained 4 days before. The only reason we were able to do this is because it was on the side of a mountain. So the water ran off enough that we can get on the field. We went in with the mower. We had the deflector shield down. Yes, it was only 60% of cutter bar width. We had the deflector shield down, and this is what we got as we went through the field. Piles of lumps all the way through the field. And you know what? Lumps don't dry. They're just lumps. Because you took your laundry out of the wash machine and you threw it on the floor in a lump, it doesn't dry. It doesn't dry if you take your hay out the back of the machine and throw it into a lump and drop it on the ground. For you guys up in Jefferson, Lewis County, here's Mike Hunter actually doing some work. We have evidence of this. Mike, it was a tremendous help in terms of us doing this clover study. His dad wasn't home. So when we took the mower and did the narrow swath, we had the same problem where it was lumping. So because his dad wasn't home, we took all the shields off the back of his machine. It took us about 2 hours to get them all off. We tore all the shields off, and lo and behold, the lumps completely disappeared. It's still at 60-65% of cutter bar width, and I think a little spreader on either corner would probably correct that, but the lumps were gone. And because the lumps were gone, the stuff dried a whole lot better. If you look at the red line at the bottom, that is the narrow swath. It's not drying at all. If you look at the blue line above it, that's the wide swath with lumps in it. It didn't dry much better than the narrow. We were getting dry hay on the thin spots and fresh cut, not dried at all stuff in the lumps. So it doesn't dry. Yet where we did it at Mike's, the same machine, and you look at laying it out, in this case, it was only 60% of cutter bar width. We still had it dry enough. We could make silage in about 7 hours after mowing. So it has a huge impact on your drying rate. What about conditioning red clover? I thought conditioners, intermeshing rolls were going to work because clover is a forb. It has a very succulent stem. Alfalfa is closer related to trees in terms of lignin and the stiffness of the stem. When we did alfalfa wide swath, we found no advantage for conditioning. When we did red clover, this was heavy first cutting red clover with rain the night before, we found no advantage for conditioning. They dried at the same rate if they were laid out at the same swath width. So conditioning is not needed for making silage. Now, there's a question about times. Does a conditioner matter? This is work from Wisconsin, and if you look at that early dry down before 50%, if you're doing all grass, there is a slight advantage using time conditioners on straight grass. There is no advantage using it on legumes. And in fact, a huge disadvantage. First of all, you don't need to run the conditioner anyway. And secondly, it takes off leaves. I don't care what the salesman told you, it takes off leaves. I took a brand new machine up at Winchester, Ontario. We set it on the lightest setting. We went in and mowed, picked up the swath, and we were finding hunks, not individual leaves, hunks of leaves all over behind the machine. You lose leaves. The salesman says it doesn't take leaves off. First of all, your fingers are held on a lot better than leaves are. Tell the salesman you'll start the machine up and put his hand in there and see how many fingers he has left when he's done. And it's worse on alfalfa. How bad is it? In a study where they took the average protein loss of the average leaf loss. I had a 350 cow farm with a brand new time conditioner back when soybean meal was $2.80 a ton. And just to get his feed back to what it was when he pulled into the field in terms of protein alone, he had to spend $15,000. This is back in 2002. $15,000 on soybean meal just to make his forage equal to what it was when he pulled into the field. That's the kind of leaf loss you have with tine conditioners. If you're using tine conditioners on legumes, take them out. They are not doing you any good. It is the wrong thing to be using. Now, red clover. The swaths only dry on the outer 3/4 of an inch. As you can see in the upper left portion of this picture, I just reached in and pulled the clover aside. It was a gray cast on the field. As soon as I pulled it aside, it was green underneath. Why? It's not drying. It only dries on the outer 3/4 of an inch. And this comes to that very perceptive question that was asked a few minutes ago. What about tedding? Tedding is very effective at increasing the drying rate because we take those lower layers, bring them up, and spread them out. Now, before you get hyperventilating about losing leaves, remember, the plant dries from the base of the stem up. The last thing to dry are the leaves. You're pulling into the field when those leaves are just getting a gray cast on the top. They're very soft. They're held on very well. And if you run the tedder through the field, it's going to spread it out without losing the leaves. A key piece, though, again, comes back to there's a hardware issue. There's a loose nut at the steering wheel. You have to watch, I'm getting ahead of myself. You have to watch, well, this is it drying right here, clover versus alfalfa. Here's where we tedded it. You can see at 4 hours when we tedded it, at 4.5 hours, it was getting too dry. It just melted before our eyes. And this is the part that we get worried about. This is a tedder lump. The guys went into it. This was heavy first cutting red clover. They went into it like they were tedding third cutting alfalfa, real thin stuff. And it was grabbing hunks of it. You've all seen a taco shell. It's like a curve. Well, this was a curve, a compacted clover with a 1-inch curve at the base of it, or a 1/2-inch curve at the base of it, because that's where the rod grabbed a great big hunk of it, packed it all together like a snowball, and chucked that out the back. And it doesn't dry that way. You need to get off the machine and see what the tedder is doing as you start to make sure you are tedding, not lumping. And when you slow down at gears, because you're doing a whole lot more material, because it's heavy first cutting, it's going to spread it out a whole lot better, and you're going to get really good drying. We did have one test with second cutting red clover, and we think it would work with third cutting red clover. We don't think you need to ted at all on that, even though it's pretty good yielding. If you get it spread out, 85% of cutter bar width, there's no need to ted. It's only on the first cutting where we were running into this. As far as we know, we're still doing work on this. Now, when you sum this all up, and this is work that I really thank Farm Viability for funding us, because nobody else would even talk to us about doing this, because you know you can't get clover dry. The narrow swath took 27 hours to reach 29% moisture level. Including that lumpy piece in there, the wide swath took only 7 hours to reach 31%. That's where you can chop it or round bale it if you wanted it that moisture. In less than 6 hours, the wide tedded was up to 32, almost 33%. This is in a year where we had 10 inches of rain in the month of June. Every place we did it, we had rain the night before. So we were talking really wet conditions, and we were getting these kinds of drying rates. Tedding takes about 2 hours off on red clover. So that's one of the ways that you can accelerate it. Now, what about alfalfa? This was a study. We had a company that asked us if their variety would dry faster than others. Unfortunately, the answer was no, but hey, that's the way it goes. I just tell them as it is. And when you look at the different varieties, the orange line is where it was when I pulled in with the mower. This was tall stuff starting to go down, probably about half bloom. It was a humid day, but the sun was shining. An hour and a half afterwards, we could have been chopping that for silage. And at 2.5 hours, it was getting too dry. And that comes to one of the most critical problems we have found with this. We have a problem that's about 6 inches. It's between the ears. People can't get their head around the idea that I don't mow the countryside. What I mow is ready between an hour and a half to 2 hours after I mow. It's ready to be round bale wrapped or chopped. So you have to change your entire system. And a large farm that I know that switched to this, and he said he increased his profitability 6 figures. He said it took me 5 years to figure out what to do with my crew so I could get things done in the right sequence and the right timing. But you're looking at an hour and a half to 2.5 hours after mowing, the stuff is ready to ensile if you're chopping. You can go a little longer. We've driven it to 50% dry matter, 55% dry matter rather. Letting it go a little longer and or using a tedder, depending on how dry you want to get your round bales. I think your machine doesn't like my automation. Yeah, I think it does. Okay, this is the other piece that has been a big advantage on this system. It wasn't anticipated. We were doing this solely for feed quality, so we could go to a high forage diet. And I had a guy write to me in Wisconsin, one of the agents up there, and he said, the biggest advantage for us is weather. This has been a huge savings for us in weather. Why? This was our cutting window. I think it was in 2003 or 2004. In that 2-week period where the alfalfa was ready to be harvested, we had one day where you can mow one day and ensile it the next day. You had one opportunity to get all your feed in. You know what kind of equipment lineup you would need? But within that same weather pattern, exactly the same weather pattern, if you mowed it wide and was able to ensile it the same day, if it's clover, you tedded it, or alfalfa, you got it dry enough so you can ensile it the same day. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days in that same lousy weather where we could be putting in feed. And the guys that were doing it traditional way, where they mow it one day and ensile it the next, were sitting there twiddling their thumbs because it's going to rain tomorrow. And actually, the farmers told me I missed a couple days in here because they had humid weather. Okay, we're going to have thunder showers this afternoon. You've seen that report, right? We're going to get thunder showers this afternoon. They would go out in the morning, mow it, lay it out wide. After lunch, they would go out and either chop it or round bale wrap it, and it would be into storage. And then we'd have thunder showers that afternoon, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, the thunderstorms would move through, and the feed is in storage. That's where smaller farms can really get a competitive advantage, because you can go out and pick these small pieces off time and time again in these little windows and capitalize on it for your farm. Now, the big problem we have run into, and it's almost consistent, every person who tries this system tells me, the first year I tried it, I got it too dry. Why? Because they're looking at that stuff and they expect it to look like cornflakes on the outside when they're out there chopping, and it said it just has this gray cast, and it's this limp, the leaves are all limp, it seems like they have moisture in them. But if you run it through a Koster tester, the stuff is ready. So you've got to be ready to roll, because this will get too dry. And it impacts your entire system, whether you're chopping or if you are round bale wrapping. This stuff is ready in a shorter time interval. You have a custom guy coming in, don't go mow the whole countryside and call him up, because it's going to be way too dry by the time he gets there. You're going to be losing leaves. It's not going to ferment well because it's too dry. You need to coordinate this a whole lot closer. So